Chapter 1. New Year, same rivalry. Jackson Connors had never been a fan of New Year's resolutions. They felt like promises made under duress, usually by people holding champagne flutes and unrealistic expectations. He sat on his worn leather couch, legs stretched out, nursing a mug of coffee instead of something bubbly. Outside his apartment window, the small town of Willow Creek glittered under a fresh layer of snow, the kind that made everything look like a postcard. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly how Jackson liked it, until the front door burst open. "Little brother." The voice was unmistakable, deep, booming, and full of trouble. Ryan, the eldest Connors, strode in like he owned the place, which, to be fair, he often acted like he did. Behind him came Luke, the middle brother, grinning like a man who had just discovered a new way to torment his sibling. Jackson groaned. "Ever heard of knocking? Ever heard of celebrating?" Ryan tossed his coat onto the armchair and plopped down beside Jackson. "It's New Year's Eve. You're supposed to be out kissing strangers and making bad decisions." "I'm good," Jackson said, sipping his coffee. "I made one bad decision already, leaving my door unlocked." Luke laughed, dropping a six-pack on the coffee table. "We're here to save you from your tragic, lonely existence." Jackson eyed the beer. "Nothing says brotherly love like unsolicited pity." Ryan leaned back, smirking. "We're not pitying you. We're staging an intervention. You've officially become boring." Jackson opened his mouth to argue, but the knock at the door cut him off. He frowned. "If that's a singing telegram, I swear." He swung the door open and froze. Of course, Jill Howard. Because the universe had a twisted sense of humor. She stood there in a red coat dusted with snow, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief that spelled trouble. "Happy New Year, Jack," she said sweetly, using the nickname she knew he hated. "Jill." He forced a smile. "What a surprise." "Not really," she said, breezing past him like she owned the place. "Your brothers texted me." Jackson turned slowly, glaring at Ryan and Luke. "You didn't." Ryan grinned. "We did." Jill shrugged off her coat and tossed it onto the same chair Ryan had claimed. "So what's the plan? Board games? Karaoke? Or are we just going to sit here and watch Jackson sulk?" Jackson crossed his arms. "I wasn't sulking. You were brooding," Jill corrected, flashing him a grin that could power a small city. "Big difference." Luke cracked open a beer. "We were just discussing resolutions." "Oh, perfect." Jill perched on the arm of the couch, far too close for Jackson's comfort. "What's yours, Jack?" "Finally admit I'm better at everything." Jackson snorted. "Better at everything? Please." Ryan leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Sounds like a challenge." Jackson shot him a look. "Don't." But it was too late. Jill's competitive streak had been activated. "Fine," she said, turning to Jackson with a smile that was equal parts sweet and dangerous. "Resolution bet. You pick one, I pick one. Whoever sticks to theirs longer wins." Jackson hesitated. He knew that look. That was the same look she'd had in 5th grade when she bet him she could climb the monkey bars faster. He'd lost and ended up carrying her backpack for a week. "What's the prize?" Jill's grin widened. "Loser cooks dinner for the winner. For a month." Ryan whistled. "That's brutal." Jackson considered his options. Back out and endure endless teasing, or accept and risk culinary servitude. He sighed. "Fine. You're on." Jill extended her hand. "Deal." He shook it, and the spark that shot up his arm startled him. He ignored it because that's what he did. Ignore things, especially things that made his heart race. Ryan clapped his hands. "This is going to be fun." Jackson had a sinking feeling his brothers weren't talking about the bet. Chapter 2. The resolution bet. Jackson woke up the next morning with the distinct feeling that he'd made a tactical error. The kind of error that started with a handshake and ended with humiliation. He stared at the ceiling, replaying last night's events like a bad movie. Jill Howard. A bet. Dinner for a month. What had he been thinking? He dragged himself out of bed, brewed a pot of coffee, and tried to convince himself it wasn't that bad. It was just a resolution bet. People made resolutions all the time. Most of them failed by February. He could survive this. Probably. His phone buzzed. A text from Jill. "Jill, hope you're ready to lose, Jack. I've already started mine." "Jackson, you don't even know what mine is yet." Jill, "Doesn't matter. I'm winning." "Jackson, you're insufferable." Jill, "And yet you keep answering my texts. Interesting." Jackson tossed the phone onto the counter and muttered something about competitive lunatics. He poured his coffee and sat down, trying to figure out what his resolution should be. Jill hadn't told him hers yet, which meant she was playing mind games. Classic Jill. The doorbell rang. Jackson frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door and groaned. Ryan and Luke. Again. "Morning sunshine." Luke breezed in carrying a box of donuts. "Thought you could use some carbs." Jackson eyed the box. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Ryan said, following him inside. "Just wanted to check on our favorite little brother. And maybe hear more about this bet." Jackson sighed. "You two are relentless." Ryan grinned. "We're invested. This could be the thing that finally gets you and Jill to admit you're in love." Jackson choked on his coffee. We're not what? No. Luke smirked. Sure. That's why you two have been competing for, what, 15 years? 11. Jackson corrected automatically, then cursed himself for knowing the exact number. Ryan leaned against the counter. So, what's your resolution? Jackson hesitated. I haven't decided yet. Luke laughed. You agreed to a bet without knowing your resolution? Amateur move. Jackson glared. I was ambushed. Ryan tapped his chin thoughtfully. Make it something hard. Something that'll impress her. Jackson snorted. I'm not trying to impress her. Sure you're not, Luke said, grinning. How about running every morning? Jackson shook his head. I like my sleep. Cooking classes? Ryan suggested. Jackson raised an eyebrow. You just want free food. Ryan grinned. Guilty. Jackson sighed. I'll figure it out. As if summoned by the universe or maybe by sheer bad luck, there was another knock at the door. Jackson didn't need to guess who it was. He opened the door and yep, there she was. Jill Howard, looking far too cheerful for someone who had declared war less than 12 hours ago. Morning, Jack, she said, breezing past him like she owned the place. Hi, boys. Ryan and Luke greeted her like she was family, which in a way she practically was. Jackson shut the door and turned to face her. What are you doing here? Checking in on my competition, Jill said sweetly. Have you picked your resolution yet? Jackson crossed his arms. Have you? Of course. She smiled like a cat with a canary. I'm going to volunteer at the animal shelter every weekend. Jackson blinked. That's actually nice. I know, Jill said, her grin widening. Which means you're going to look like a selfish slacker if you pick something lame. Jackson groaned. You're evil. Competitive, Jill corrected. So what's yours? Jackson glanced at his brothers, who were both watching with barely contained amusement. He could practically hear their thoughts. Pick something impressive. Don't look weak. Fine, Jackson said, squaring his shoulders. I'm going to learn to play the guitar. Jill's eyebrows shot up. The guitar. Yep. Jackson nodded, trying to look confident. By the end of the year, I'll be able to play a full song. Ryan whistled. Bold move. Luke grinned. Can't wait to hear Mary Had a Little Lamb. Jill tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she intended to solve. Interesting choice. I approve. Jackson felt an odd sense of relief, until she added, this is going to be fun. He had a sinking feeling her definition of fun involved public humiliation. The rest of the day was a blur of errands and mental pep talks. Jackson stopped by the local music store, bought a beginner's guitar, and tried not to think about how ridiculous this was. He was a numbers guy, not a musician. His idea of rhythm was balancing spreadsheets. By evening, he was sitting on his couch, guitar in hand, watching a tutorial video. His fingers felt like they belonged to someone else. The strings bit into his skin, and the sound he produced was less music and more dying animal. His phone buzzed again. Jill, how's the Guitar Hero thing going? Jackson, great. I'm practically a rock star. Jill, sure you are. Want me to come over and judge? Jackson, hard pass. Jill, suit yourself. I'll check in tomorrow. Jackson groaned and set the guitar aside. He had a feeling tomorrow was going to be worse. Meanwhile, Jill sat in her apartment, scrolling through volunteer sign-up sheets with a smug smile. She loved winning. Always had. And if beating Jackson meant spending time with puppies, well, that was just a bonus. But as she filled out the form, she caught herself wondering why she cared so much about this bet. It wasn't just about winning. It never had been. Not really. She shook her head, banishing the thought. This was about competition. About proving a point. That was all. Probably. Chapter 3. Work chaos and coffee wars. Monday mornings were never Jackson's favorite, but this one was shaping up to be a special kind of disaster. His inbox looked like a crime scene. Emails stacked like bodies, deadlines screaming for attention. He rubbed his temples and muttered, Happy New Year, my foot. The office was buzzing with that fake cheer people put on after the holidays. Everyone was talking about resolutions, gym memberships, and juice cleanses. Jackson just wanted coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead. By 10 o'clock, he'd survived 2 meetings, 3 passive-aggressive emails, and 1 printer jam that nearly cost him his sanity. He decided he deserved a break, a real one, which meant a trip to his sanctuary, Bean and Brew, the cozy coffee shop 2 blocks from his office. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, and the smell of roasted beans hit him like a warm hug. He exhaled, already feeling better, until he saw her. Jill Howard, sitting at the corner table like she owned the place, laptop open, coffee in hand, looking infuriatingly perfect in a cream sweater and jeans. Jackson froze. Of course she was here, because the universe had a vendetta. She looked up, spotted him, and grinned. Well, if it isn't Guitar Hero. Jackson groaned inwardly and walked to the counter. Don't start. Oh, I'm just getting warmed up, Jill said, closing her laptop and sauntering over. How's the resolution going? Can you play Twinkle, Twinkle yet? Jackson shot her a look. I'll have you know I mastered the art of tuning yesterday. Jill laughed, and he hated that it sounded like music. Impressive. Really. He ordered his usual, large black coffee, extra shot, and tried to ignore the way Jill leaned against the counter like she was posing for a magazine cover. The barista handed him his cup, and Jackson turned to leave, but Jill blocked his path. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Afraid I'll outshine you in public?" Jackson smirked. "You're volunteering at the shelter, not running for mayor." "True," Jill said, tilting her head. "But I did sign up for extra shifts, to make sure I win." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You're really committed to this." "Winning is a lifestyle," Jill said, sipping her latte. "You should try it sometime." Jackson chuckled despite himself. "You're impossible. And yet you keep talking to me?" Jill said, smiling like she just scored a point. Jackson shook his head and headed for the door, but Jill fell into step beside him. "Where are you off to?" "Back to work," Jackson said. "Unlike some people, I have deadlines." "Harsh," Jill said, mock-offended. "I'm working too. Remote life, remember?" Jackson glanced at her. "So you're just hanging out here all day?" "Pretty much," Jill said cheerfully. "It's cozy, good coffee, and now, bonus entertainment." Jackson groaned. "I'm not entertainment." "Oh, you are," Jill said, grinning. "Watching you pretend you're not competitive is my new favorite hobby." Jackson stopped at the crosswalk and looked at her. Normal people make resolutions like eat healthier or save money." Jill shrugged. "Normal is boring." Jackson laughed, and for a moment, the tension between them softened. Then the light changed and they walked in silence, well, mostly silence. Jill hummed something under her breath, and Jackson realized it was a guitar riff. He rolled his eyes. Back at his desk, Jackson tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting to Jill, to her grin, to the way she made everything feel like a game he couldn't stop playing. He told himself it was just the bet, just competition, nothing more. His phone buzzed, a photo from Jill, her at the shelter, holding a puppy that looked like it had been designed by angels. "Jill, meet Max. He thinks I'm winning too." Jackson, bribing puppies for sympathy points? Low blow. Jill, admit it. "You're impressed." Jackson, "I'm impressed Max hasn't run away yet." Jill, careful, Jack. "Jealousy looks good on you." Jackson tossed the phone aside and groaned. He was in trouble. Big trouble. That evening, Jackson sat on his couch with the guitar, determined to make progress. He watched another tutorial, fingers fumbling over the strings. The sound was marginally better than yesterday, which wasn't saying much. Halfway through his practice, there was a knock at the door. Jackson frowned, set the guitar down and opened the door, only to find Jill standing there, holding a bag of takeout. "Thought you could use some fuel," she said, breezing past him like she owned the place. "And maybe a little moral support." Jackson stared. "Do you just not have boundaries?" "Boundaries are boring," Jill said, setting the bag on the counter. "What are we working on? Wonderwall? Smoke on the water?" Jackson groaned. "I'm still on basic chords." Jill grinned. "Perfect. I'll judge." Jackson picked up the guitar and strummed, producing a sound that could generously be described as experimental. Jill winced. "Wow, that's something." Jackson shot her a look. "You're enjoying this way too much." "Absolutely," Jill said, laughing. "But hey, points for effort." Jackson set the guitar down and grabbed a takeout container. "You're relentless. And you love it," Jill said, smiling. Jackson didn't answer, because maybe, just maybe, she was right. Chapter 4. Family pressure cooker. Jackson Connors had survived Monday. Barely. He'd wrestled spreadsheets, endured Jill's coffee shop ambush, and managed to strum something that sounded vaguely like a chord. He deserved peace, quiet, maybe a nap. Instead, he got a text from his mother. "Mom, dinner tonight. Family only. No excuses." Jackson frowned. Family dinners were usually harmless, unless his brothers were involved, which they always were. He typed back, "Jackson, fine. What time?" "Mom? 6. And Jill's coming." Jackson stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed him. Jill, of course. Because why wouldn't his mother invite the one person guaranteed to turn dinner into a competitive circus? He considered faking the flu, or a sudden work emergency. But his mother had a sixth sense for lies. He was doomed. By 6 o'clock, Jackson was pulling into his parents' driveway, muttering under his breath. The Connors house was warm and inviting, twinkling with leftover holiday lights. He stepped inside and was immediately greeted by chaos. Ryan and Luke were in the living room, laughing like hyenas. His mother was bustling in the kitchen, and his father was setting the table with military precision. And then there was Jill, standing by the fireplace, chatting with his mom like she belonged there. Jackson took a deep breath and walked in. "Evening." Jill turned, her smile bright enough to power the grid. "Jack, you made it." Jackson forced a smile. "Wouldn't miss it." Ryan clapped him on the back. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence." Luke grinned. "We were just talking about your guitar skills." Jackson groaned. "Of course you were." Jill smirked. "Don't worry, I told them you're making progress. Jackson narrowed his eyes. Define progress. Your fingers are on the strings, Jill said sweetly. That counts. Ryan laughed so hard he nearly dropped his beer. Dinner was a Connors classic. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, and enough side dishes to feed a small army. Jackson took his usual seat, only to realize Jill was sitting beside him. Naturally, his mother beamed. Isn't this nice? Everyone together. Jackson muttered. Define nice. Jill elbowed him lightly. Play nice, Jack. Ryan raised his glass. To family, and to new beginnings. Luke smirked. And to Jackson finally finding a hobby. Jackson shot him a look. You're hilarious. His mother smiled. I think it's wonderful you're learning guitar. Very romantic. Jackson choked on his water. Romantic. Of course, his mom said, oblivious to his horror. Women love musicians. Ryan grinned. Hear that, little brother? You're practically a heartthrob. Jill laughed. Don't get ahead of yourselves. Jackson glared at her. You're enjoying this way too much. Absolutely, Jill said, smiling like the cat who ate the canary. Halfway through dinner, the ambush began. So, Jill, Jackson's mom said casually, any special someone in your life? Jill smiled. Nope, just me. Ryan leaned forward. Interesting. You and Jackson spend a lot of time together. Jackson froze. Ryan, Luke jumped in. Yeah, like neighbors, coffee buddies, family dinners? Jackson groaned. Stop. His mom looked delighted. You two would make such a cute couple. Jackson nearly dropped his fork. Mom! Jill, to her credit, didn't miss a beat. We'd kill each other. Ryan smirked. Or fall madly in love. Jackson glared. Not happening. Jill grinned. Definitely not. But the way her eyes sparkled when she said it made Jackson wonder if she was as sure as she sounded. After dinner, Jackson escaped to the porch for air. He leaned against the railing, staring at the snow-covered yard, trying to calm the storm in his head. Jill joined him a moment later, her breath visible in the cold night. Your family's relentless, she said, handing him a mug of cocoa. Jackson took it, grateful for the warmth. They're insane. They mean well, Jill said softly. Jackson glanced at her. You didn't seem fazed. Jill shrugged. I'm used to it. People have been trying to pair us up since 3rd grade. Jackson chuckled. True. They stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with something unspoken. Then Jill smiled. Don't worry, Jack. I'm not planning to marry you just because your mom wants grandkids. Jackson laughed, but it sounded hollow, because for the first time, the idea didn't seem entirely ridiculous. Chapter 5. The snowstorm setup. Jackson Connors had one goal for Friday night. Pizza, a movie, and 0 human interaction. After the family dinner ambush earlier in the week, he needed solitude like oxygen. He'd even turned his phone to silent, because Jill had developed a habit of texting him pictures of puppies with captions like, still winning. He was halfway through ordering his pizza when the weather alert popped up on his laptop. Winter storm warning, heavy snowfall expected. Travel hazardous. Jackson frowned. Willow Creek got snow every year, but this sounded serious. He shrugged. He wasn't going anywhere. Let it snow. 10 minutes later, the universe laughed in his face. The knock at the door was sharp and insistent. Jackson groaned, dragging himself off the couch. He opened the door and froze. Jill Howard. Snowflakes clung to her hair, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and she looked, well, annoyingly gorgeous. She also looked worried. Jack, she said, breathless. My heat's out. Jackson blinked. Your heat. Dead, Jill said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. And the storm's getting worse. The repair guy can't come until tomorrow. Jackson stared at her, then at the swirling snow outside. You're saying, I need to crash here, Jill said, dropping her overnight bag on the floor. Unless you want me to freeze to death, which would technically make you lose the bet. Jackson rubbed his temples. You're unbelievable. Competitive, Jill corrected, flashing him a grin. So, where do I sleep? Jackson sighed. Couch. Perfect, Jill said, kicking off her boots. You're a lifesaver, Jack. Jackson muttered something about divine punishment and went to grab extra blankets. By 8 o'clock, the storm was in full swing. Snow piled against the windows, wind howled like a banshee, and Jackson's cozy night had turned into a sitcom. Jill was curled up on the couch in his hoodie, his favorite hoodie, and Jackson was trying very hard not to notice how good she looked in it. Nice place, Jill said, sipping cocoa. Very minimalist. Jackson smirked. That's code for boring. Accurate, Jill said, grinning. But cozy. Jackson sat in the armchair, guitar leaning against the wall like an accusation. Jill noticed it immediately. Play something, she said. Jackson groaned. No. Come on, Jill said, eyes sparkling. I want to hear your progress. Jackson shook his head. It's bad. Even better, Jill said, laughing. Entertainment for the storm. Jackson sighed, grabbed the guitar, and strummed a chord that sounded like a dying walrus. Jill winced. Wow, that's unique. Jackson shot her a look. You're enjoying this way too much. Absolutely, Jill said, laughing. But hey, points for effort. Jackson set the guitar down and grabbed his cocoa. You're relentless. And you love it, Jill said softly. Jackson didn't answer. Because maybe, just maybe, she was right. Later, they ended up watching a movie. Something light and funny. Because neither of them wanted drama. Jill stretched out on the couch, her feet tucked under a blanket, and Jackson sat in the armchair pretending not to notice how close she was. The storm raged outside, but inside, it felt warm, comfortable, dangerous. Halfway through the movie, Jill spoke without looking at him. Remember senior year? That math competition. Jackson chuckled. You mean the one you lost? Jill shot him a look. By 1 point. Still counts, Jackson said, grinning. Jill smiled, then grew quiet. You know, I've always liked that about us. Jackson frowned. What? The competition, Jill said softly. It's fun. Keeps things interesting. Jackson studied her, the flicker of the TV casting shadows across her face. Yeah, he said quietly. It does. For a moment, the air felt different, charged, like the storm outside had seeped into the room. Jackson wanted to say something else, something that had been sitting in his chest for years. But before he could, Jill yawned and curled deeper into the blanket. Long day, she murmured. Wake me if the roof caves in. Jackson smiled faintly. Deal. He watched her drift off, her hair spilling across the pillow, and wondered when exactly his biggest rival had become the person he couldn't stop thinking about. The storm lasted all night. Jackson barely slept, not because of the wind, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jill laughing, teasing, smiling like she knew all his secrets. And maybe she did. Chapter 6. The dating disaster. Jackson Connors had one rule: never let his brothers meddle in his love life. Unfortunately, his brothers treated rules like polite suggestions, which explained why he was currently sitting in a booth at Willow Creek's fanciest restaurant, waiting for a blind date he hadn't agreed to. Ryan had called it Operation Save Jackson, which sounded less like matchmaking and more like a military maneuver. Luke had promised the woman was perfect. Jackson had promised himself he'd leave after one drink. He checked his watch. 7 o'clock. His date was late. He considered bolting, until he saw Jill walk through the door. Jackson froze. She wasn't his date. She couldn't be. Except, she was heading straight for him, wearing a black dress that made his brain short-circuit. Jack, she said, sliding into the booth like she owned it. Fancy seeing you here. Jackson blinked. What are you doing? Having dinner, Jill said, smiling sweetly. What about you? Jackson opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the hostess appeared with another woman, a tall brunette with a dazzling smile. Your table, ma'am, the hostess said, gesturing to Jackson's booth. Jackson groaned inwardly. His actual date. Perfect timing. The brunette smiled. Hi, you must be Jackson. Jackson stood, forcing a smile. Yeah. Hi. Jill's grin widened. Oh, this is going to be fun. 5 minutes later, Jackson was sitting between two women, his blind date, whose name was Claire, and Jill, who had apparently decided to stay and keep him company. Claire was talking about her job in marketing. Jill was sipping wine like it was popcorn at a movie. So, Jackson, Claire said, leaning in. Ryan told me you're learning guitar. That's so cool. Jackson shot a murderous look at his brothers, who were sitting at the bar, watching like proud parents. Yeah, he said, forcing a smile. Just started. Jill smirked. He's a natural. If you like experimental jazz. Jackson glared. Ignore her. Claire laughed politely. I love music. Maybe you can play for me sometime. Jackson opened his mouth, but Jill cut in. Oh, you should hear him try Happy Birthday. It's unforgettable. Jackson clenched his jaw. Jill. Claire giggled. Sounds adorable. Jill grinned. Adorable is one word for it. Jackson considered faking a fire alarm. The night spiraled from awkward to catastrophic. Every time Jackson tried to talk to Claire, Jill chimed in with some embarrassing anecdote, like the time Jackson fell off the monkey bars in 3rd grade, or the time he accidentally wore mismatched shoes to prom. Claire laughed. Jackson died inside. By dessert, Claire was checking her phone. Well, this was fun, she said, standing. But I have an early meeting. Jackson nodded, relieved. Of course. Thanks for coming. Claire smiled at Jill. Nice meeting you too. Jill waved. Likewise. As Claire left, Jackson turned to Jill, his patience hanging by a thread. What was that? Jill blinked innocently. What? You sabotaged my date, Jackson said. Jill shrugged. She wasn't right for you. Jackson stared. And you know that because? Because I know you, Jill said simply. Better than anyone. Jackson opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because she was right, and that terrified him. Ryan and Luke sauntered over, grinning like idiots. Well, Ryan said. That was entertaining. Jackson glared. You two are dead to me. Luke smirked. Pretty sure Jill did us a favor. Jackson shot Jill a look. You're impossible. Jill smiled. And yet, You keep inviting me into your life. Jackson didn't answer. Because maybe, just maybe, he didn't want her to leave. Later that night, Jackson sat on his couch, staring at his guitar. He picked it up, strummed a chord, and thought about Jill, her laugh, her smile, the way she'd said "I know you." He wondered if she was right. If she knew him better than anyone. If that was why no one else ever fit. And for the first time, Jackson wondered if this bet wasn't about winning at all. Chapter 7. Jill's turn. Jackson Connors was having a good day. Or at least he was trying to. He'd finished his reports early. His coffee hadn't tasted like burnt despair. And his guitar practice had produced something that almost resembled music. Almost. Then Ryan called. "Little brother," Ryan said cheerfully, which was never a good sign. "Guess who we saw at the Copper Spoon?" Jackson frowned. "If this is another blind date setup?" "Nope," Ryan said, voice dripping with amusement. "It's Jill." Jackson froze. "Jill?" "Yep," Ryan said. "On a date." Jackson's stomach dropped like a stone. "What?" "Tall guy, nice suit," Ryan continued. "Looked like he stepped out of a magazine." Jackson gripped the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your face right now is probably priceless," Ryan said, laughing. "Later, little bro." The call ended, leaving Jackson staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. Jill. On a date. With Mr. Perfect. Why did that bother him? It shouldn't. She was free to date whoever she wanted. He didn't care. Except he did. A lot. By the time Jackson got home, he was a mess of irritation and questions he didn't want to answer. He paced his apartment, muttering under his breath. He told himself he wasn't jealous. He told himself this was about the bet. If Jill was distracted by some guy, she might slack on her resolution. That was all. His phone buzzed. A text from Jill. "Jill, guess what? I had the best dinner tonight." Jackson, "Good for you." "Jill, you sound thrilled." Jackson, "I'm busy." Jill, "Practicing guitar? Or sulking?" Jackson tossed the phone onto the couch and groaned. She was enjoying this. Of course she was. The next morning, Jackson stopped by Bean and Brew for coffee, hoping caffeine would cure his mood. Didn't, because Jill was there. Again. Looking annoyingly radiant in a green sweater, sipping her latte like she owned the place. "Morning, Jack," she said, grinning. "You look tense." Jackson forced a smile. "I'm fine." "Sure," Jill said, sliding into the seat across from him. "So, guess what?" Jackson braced himself. "What? My date last night? Amazing," Jill said, eyes sparkling. "We're going out again." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Great." Jill tilted her head. "You don't sound thrilled." Jackson took a long sip of coffee. "Why would I care?" Jill smiled slowly. "Good question." Jackson glared. "You're impossible." "And yet," Jill said, leaning in, "you keep showing up where I am." Jackson opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because she was right. And that terrified him. Later that day, Jackson tried to focus on work, but his mind kept replaying Jill's words. "We're going out again." He hated how much that bothered him. He hated the idea of her laughing at someone else's jokes, smiling at someone else across a table. By evening, he was back on his couch, guitar in hand, strumming like his life depended on it. He told himself it was about the bet, about winning, but every chord sounded like frustration, like jealousy. His phone buzzed again. "Jill. Jill, don't forget. Puppy shift tomorrow. Max says hi." Jackson, "Tell Max I'm still winning." Jill, "Sure, Jack. Whatever helps you sleep at night." Jackson set the guitar down and stared at the ceiling. He was in trouble. Big trouble. Because this wasn't just about competition anymore. And he wasn't sure what to do about it. Meanwhile, Jill sat in her apartment, scrolling through her messages with a smile that wouldn't quit. She'd had a nice time on her date. The guy was charming, funny, perfectly polite. But when she thought about who made her laugh until her stomach hurt, who knew every one of her quirks, who felt like home, it wasn't him. It was Jack. And that scared her more than any storm ever could. Chapter 8. The big work presentation. Jackson Connors had never been nervous about work. Numbers made sense. Spreadsheets behaved. Deadlines were predictable. People? Not so much. Which explained why his stomach was doing somersaults as he stared at the conference room where his career-defining presentation was about to happen. This wasn't just any meeting. It was the meeting. The one that could land him a promotion and finally shut Ryan up about little brother playing it safe. Jackson had spent weeks preparing. But now, staring at the projector that refused to cooperate, he felt like a man on the Titanic watching the iceberg approach. "Need a hand." The voice was warm, teasing, and unmistakable. Jackson turned, and there she was, Jill Howard, leaning against the doorframe like she owned the place, holding 2 coffees and wearing that grin that made his brain short-circuit. "What are you doing here?" Jackson asked, trying not to sound panicked. "Saving your life," Jill said, walking in and setting a coffee on the table. "Ryan told me about your big presentation. Thought you could use moral support." Jackson groaned. "Ryan needs a hobby." "Ryan has a hobby," Jill said, smirking. "It's called meddling." Jackson sighed. "The projector's dead." Jill glanced at the machine, then at him. You tried turning it off and on? Jackson shot her a look. Do I look like an amateur? Yes, Jill said sweetly, crouching down to fiddle with the cables. Lucky for you. I'm a genius. Jackson watched her work, trying not to notice how her hair fell over her shoulder, how her sweater hugged her in all the right places. He told himself this was about the projector, about survival, not about the way his pulse jumped every time she smiled. There, Jill said, standing as the screen flickered to life. You're welcome. Jackson exhaled. Thanks. Jill grinned. You owe me. Jackson smirked. Add it to the list. 10 minutes later, the room was full of suits and serious faces. Jackson launched into his presentation, voice steady, slides crisp. He was in the zone, until he glanced at the back of the room and saw Jill, sitting with her coffee, watching him like he was the only person in the world. And suddenly, Jackson wanted to impress her more than anyone else. He nailed the pitch. Every question, every stat, every curveball, they all landed perfectly. When it was over, the applause was polite but enthusiastic. His boss clapped him on the shoulder. Great work, Connors. Jackson smiled, but his eyes went straight to Jill. She was grinning like she'd just won a bet. After the meeting, Jackson found her in the hallway. You didn't have to come. I wanted to, Jill said simply. You were amazing. Jackson felt something shift, something big, something dangerous. Thanks. Jill tilted her head. You know, Jack, you're good at this. Jackson chuckled. Numbers are easy. Jill smiled softly. You're easy too, when you're not trying so hard. Jackson stared at her, the air between them charged. He wanted to say something, anything, but his brain short-circuited when Jill stepped closer, her eyes locking on his. For one breathless moment, the world narrowed to her. Her smile, her scent, the way her lips parted like she was about to. Jack! Ryan's voice shattered the moment like a brick through glass. You crushed it, little bro. Jackson jerked back, cursing every sibling he had. Jill laughed, the sound warm and maddening. Saved by the bell. Jackson groaned. More like ruined by the bell. Ryan clapped him on the back. Drinks tonight. Celebration. Jill winked. I'll be there. And just like that, she was gone, leaving Jackson with a heart that felt like it had run a marathon and a question he couldn't stop asking. What would have happened if Ryan hadn't walked in? That night, Jackson sat on his couch, guitar in hand, strumming absent-mindedly. He thought about the near kiss, about Jill's smile, about the way she'd said I wanted to. He wondered if she felt it too. The pull, the spark, the thing that had been simmering between them for years. And for the first time, Jackson didn't want to ignore it. Chapter 9. The festival fiasco. Willow Creek's annual winter festival was the kind of event Jackson usually avoided. Crowds, noise, and overpriced hot chocolate weren't his idea of fun. But Ryan and Luke had insisted. It's tradition. And Jill had texted him a simple, infuriating message. Jill, see you there, Jack. Try not to embarrass yourself. So now Jackson was trudging through snow-covered streets, hands shoved in his coat pockets, wondering why he hadn't faked pneumonia. The festival was in full swing. Twinkling lights strung across the square, booths selling everything from handmade scarves to questionable funnel cakes, and a stage where a local band was butchering holiday classics. Jackson scanned the crowd, hoping to spot his brothers before Jill found him. Too late. Jack! Her voice cut through the noise like a bell. Jackson turned, and there she was, wearing a red knit hat and a smile that made his pulse trip over itself. You look thrilled, Jill said, falling into step beside him. Jackson forced a grin. Ecstatic. Good, Jill said, linking her arm through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because we're entering the couples contest. Jackson stopped dead. What? Jill tugged him forward. It's tradition. Jackson stared. For actual couples. Jill grinned. Details. Jackson groaned. Why? Because winning is a lifestyle, Jill said sweetly. And I like our odds. Jackson muttered something about divine punishment as Jill dragged him toward the registration booth. 5 minutes later, Jackson was standing on a stage in front of half the town, holding Jill's hand while a cheery announcer explained the rules. 3 challenges, 1 winning couple. Jackson considered bolting, but Jill's grip was iron. Relax, she whispered, eyes sparkling. We've been competing since 1st grade. This is just another game. Jackson sighed. A game where everyone thinks we're dating. Jill smirked. Let them. Jackson's brain short-circuited. Let them? What did that mean? Before he could ask, the first challenge began. A trivia round about how well you know your partner. The announcer fired questions. Favorite color? Blue, Jackson said instantly. Jill grinned. Correct. Favorite movie? The Princess Bride, Jill said without hesitation. Jackson blinked. How do you? Jack, Jill said, smirking. I've known you for 20 years. By the end of the round, they were in first place. Jackson wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. The second challenge was a 3-legged race across the snow. Jackson and Jill tied their legs together, and Jackson muttered, This is a bad idea. Confidence, Jack, Jill said, looping her arm through his. Follow my lead. They stumbled, slipped, and nearly face-planted twice, but somehow crossed the finish line first. Jill threw her arms around him, laughing, and for one dizzying second, Jackson forgot how to breathe. Her laugh, her warmth, her arms around his neck, felt right, too right. Then she pulled back, grinning. Told you we'd win. Jackson swallowed hard. Yeah. The final challenge was a dance-off. Jackson stared at the announcer like he'd just declared war. Dance? Jill grinned. Don't worry. I'll lead. Jackson groaned. That's what I'm afraid of. The music started, something upbeat and ridiculous, and Jill grabbed his hands, pulling him into the rhythm. Jackson stumbled, cursed, and tried not to step on her boots. Jill laughed, spinning him like they were in a rom-com montage. Relax, she shouted over the music. I'm relaxed, Jackson yelled back, tripping over his own feet. Liar, Jill said, grinning as she twirled into him. Jackson caught her, his hands on her waist, her face inches from his. The world blurred, the music, the crowd, everything, until it was just her. Her breath warm against his cheek, her eyes locking on his like they'd been waiting for this moment. And then the music stopped. The crowd cheered. Jill stepped back, smiling like nothing had happened. Jackson stood there, heart pounding, wondering if he'd imagined the spark, or if everyone else had seen it too. They won the contest. Of course they did. Jill accepted the prize, a giant basket of local goodies, with a triumphant grin. Victory tastes sweet. Jackson muttered. Victory tastes like humiliation. Jill laughed. You loved it. Jackson didn't answer, because maybe, just maybe, she was right. Later, as they walked home under the glow of festival lights, Jill slipped her hand into his. Jackson froze, staring at their joined fingers. Cold, Jill said casually. Don't read into it. Jackson chuckled, but his chest felt tight, because he was reading into it, and he wasn't sure he wanted to stop. Chapter 10. The confession curveball. Jackson Connors had a plan. A real, honest-to-goodness plan. After weeks of teasing, bets, and near kisses, he was done pretending. Tonight, he was going to tell Jill Howard exactly how he felt. He'd even practiced in the mirror, though his reflection had looked skeptical. He'd picked the perfect spot too. Willow Creek's little riverside park, quiet and lit by fairy lights left over from the festival. Romantic without trying too hard. At least that was the goal. Jackson checked his watch. Jill would be here any minute. His heart thudded like a drumline. He rehearsed the words in his head. Jill, I've been an idiot. It's not just competition. It's you. It's always been you. Simple, honest, terrifying. The sound of boots crunching on snow snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned, and there she was, bundled in a navy coat, cheeks pink from the cold, smiling like she had no idea she was about to upend his entire life. Jack, she said, walking up. You sounded mysterious on the phone. What's going on? Jackson swallowed hard. I wanted to talk. Jill tilted her head, curious. About what? Jackson opened his mouth, then froze as Jill's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her smile widened. Sorry, she said, eyes sparkling. It's Ethan. Jackson blinked. Ethan? My date, Jill said casually. Well, boyfriend now, I guess. Jackson felt the words hit like a punch to the gut. Boyfriend. His carefully rehearsed confession evaporated like mist. Oh, he said, voice flat. Congrats. Jill smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. Thanks. He's great. We've been talking about maybe going to the city this weekend. Jackson nodded, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. Sounds fun. Jill frowned slightly. You okay? Jackson shoved his hands in his pockets. Fine. She studied him for a moment, then smiled again. Anyway, what did you want to talk about? Jackson opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. He couldn't tell her now. Not when she was glowing about someone else. Not when his timing was this catastrophically bad. Nothing, he said finally. Just wanted to say hi. Jill looked puzzled but didn't press. Well, hi, she said lightly. I should get going. Ethan's waiting. Jackson nodded, his chest tight. Sure. She gave him a quick hug, warm, familiar, devastating, and walked away, her boots crunching on snow until she disappeared into the night. Jackson stood there, staring at the empty path, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. He'd waited too long, played too safe, and now Jill was with someone else. For the first time in his life, Jackson Connors didn't care about winning a bet. He cared about losing her. Back at his apartment, Jackson sat on the couch, guitar in hand, strumming aimlessly. The notes sounded hollow like his chest. He thought about Jill, her laugh, her smile, the way she'd said boyfriend now, I guess. He hated that phrase. Hated how it made him feel powerless. Ryan and Luke showed up an hour later, barging in like they owned the place. Little brother, Ryan boomed. Celebrating your big win? Jackson didn't look up. Not in the mood. Luke frowned. What happened? Jackson set the guitar down and rubbed his face. She's with someone. Ryan blinked. Jill. Jackson nodded, the word tasting bitter. Boyfriend. Ryan and Luke exchanged a look, The kind that said this is bad. Ryan sat beside him. You gonna let that stop you? Jackson stared at him. What am I supposed to do? She's happy. Luke leaned against the counter. You're miserable. Jackson laughed bitterly. Thanks for the pep talk. Ryan clapped him on the shoulder. Listen, Jack. You've been dancing around this for years. If you want her, fight for her. Jackson shook his head. It's not that simple. Ryan grinned. Sure it is. Sometimes you lose a battle to win the war. Jackson stared at his brothers, their words echoing in his head. Fight for her. Could he? Should he? Or was it too late? He didn't know. But one thing was certain. He couldn't keep pretending he didn't care. Chapter 11. Brothers' intervention. Jackson Connors had never hated the word boyfriend more in his life. It had been 3 days since Jill dropped that bombshell, and he was still walking around like someone had unplugged his soul. Work was a blur. Guitar practice was pointless. Even coffee tasted like defeat. He was sitting on his couch, staring at the muted TV, when the front door opened without warning. Again, Ryan and Luke marched in like a SWAT team, carrying pizza and beer, the universal sign of an intervention. Jackson groaned. Ever heard of knocking? Ever heard of not sulking? Ryan shot back, dropping the pizza on the coffee table. You look like a man who lost his dog. Jackson muttered. I didn't lose anything. Luke smirked. Except Jill. Jackson's jaw tightened. She's happy. Ryan grabbed a beer, popped it open, and sat beside him. And you're miserable. So, what's the plan? Jackson stared at him. Plan. Ryan grinned. To win her back. Jackson laughed bitterly. She has a boyfriend. Luke shrugged. So? You've known her for 20 years. He's known her for what? 2 weeks. Jackson rubbed his face. It's not that simple. Ryan leaned forward, eyes sharp. Sure it is. You love her. Jackson froze. The word hung in the air like a live wire. He wanted to deny it, joke it off, but he couldn't, because it was true. He loved her. He always had. He just hadn't admitted it until now. Jackson exhaled. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. Luke grinned. Finally. Ryan clapped him on the back. So stop sitting here like a sad puppy and do something. Jackson shook his head. What am I supposed to do? Show up and say, dump your boyfriend? Pick me? Ryan smirked. Not exactly. You need a grand gesture. Jackson groaned. This isn't a rom-com. Luke grinned. It could be. Jackson shot them both a look. You two are insane. Ryan leaned back, smug. Maybe. But we're right. You've been playing it safe for years. Time to take a risk. Jackson stared at the pizza, his mind spinning. A grand gesture. Something big. Something that said, I'm done pretending. He hated that his brothers were right. He hated that he'd waited this long. But most of all, he hated the idea of losing Jill without even trying. Jackson stood suddenly, grabbing his coat. Fine. Ryan blinked. Fine what? Jackson's eyes burned with determination. I'm going to fight for her. Luke grinned. Now we're talking. Ryan smirked. What's the plan? Jackson paused at the door. No idea, but I'll figure it out. And with that, he walked out into the cold night, his heart pounding like a drum. For the first time in weeks, he felt alive. Terrified, but alive. Meanwhile, Jill was sitting in her apartment, staring at her phone. Ethan had just texted about their weekend plans. Dinner in the city, maybe a show. It sounded perfect, safe, easy. So why did she feel restless? Why did her mind keep drifting to Jack? His laugh, his smile, the way he'd looked at her at the festival like she was the only person in the world. She shook her head, trying to banish the thought. Ethan was great, kind, charming, everything she should want. So why didn't it feel like enough? Chapter 12. The grand gesture. Jackson Connors had never been more nervous in his life. Not during his first job interview, not during his big presentation, not even during that time Ryan dared him to ride a mechanical bull in college. This was different. This was Jill. He stood in the middle of Willow Creek's town square, snow crunching under his boots, fairy lights twinkling overhead. His guitar case sat beside him, and his fingers were numb. Not from the cold, but from sheer terror. Because tonight he was going to do something insane. A grand gesture. Ryan and Luke were lurking nearby, grinning like proud parents at a school play. You sure about this? Ryan asked, his breath fogging in the icy air. No, Jackson said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. Luke smirked. That's the spirit. Jackson took a deep breath, pulled out his guitar, and started tuning. His brothers had helped spread the word. Subtly, of course. So by the time Jackson strummed the first chord, a small crowd had gathered, including Jill. She appeared at the edge of the square, bundled in her navy coat, her red scarf bright against the snow. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Jack, she called, walking closer. What are you? Jackson cut her off with a shaky smile. Just listen. He started playing. The chords were rough, the rhythm uneven, but the song was clear. Can't help falling in love. Simple, classic, honest. His voice wasn't perfect, but it was raw, full of every feeling he'd been holding back for years. The crowd fell silent. Jill froze, her breath catching as the lyrics wrapped around her like the winter wind. Jackson's heart pounded with every word. Take my hand. Take my whole life too. When the last note faded, Jackson lowered the guitar and looked straight at her. Jill, he said, voice steady despite the chaos inside him. I've been an idiot. For years. It's not just competition. It's you. It's always been you. The square was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. Jill stared at him, eyes wide, lips parted. For a terrifying second, Jackson thought he'd miscalculated, that she'd smile politely and walk away. Then she laughed, soft, breathless, like the sound of relief. Jack, she said, stepping forward, her boots crunching on snow. You're insane. Jackson grinned weakly. Probably. Jill stopped in front of him, her eyes shining. You really think a song fixes 20 years of stubbornness? Jackson shrugged. It's a start. Jill stared at him for one long, electric moment. Then she grabbed his coat, pulled him down, and kissed him. The crowd erupted in cheers. Ryan hooped like a maniac. Luke yelled something about, finally, but Jackson didn't hear any of it. All he felt was Jill warm, soft, real, kissing him like she'd been waiting just as long as he had. When they broke apart, Jill rested her forehead against his. You're still losing the bet, she whispered. Jackson laughed, breathless. Fine. As long as I win you. Jill smiled, and for the first time in 20 years, Jackson Connors felt like he'd truly won. Later, as they walked home hand in hand, Jill teased him about his guitar skills, and Jackson promised to keep practicing, because now, every song was for her. And if his brothers started planning a wedding before he even asked, well, that was a battle for another day. Chapter 13. Happily ever afterish, Jackson Connors had never seen his brothers look so smug. It was Sunday afternoon, and the Connors family living room was packed. His parents on the couch, Ryan and Luke grinning like they'd won the lottery, and Jill sitting beside Jackson, her hand comfortably tangled with his. Ryan raised his glass. To Jack and Jill, finally. Jackson groaned. Do you have to? Luke smirked. Absolutely. We've waited 20 years for this. Jill laughed, squeezing Jackson's hand. You two are ridiculous. Ryan grinned. Ridiculous? We're visionaries. If it weren't for us, you'd still be arguing about who's better at trivia. Jackson muttered. We weren't arguing. Jill shot him a look. You were losing. Jackson chuckled. Not anymore. His mom beamed. I'm just so happy. I knew you two belonged together. Jackson sighed. You've been saying that since 3rd grade. And I was right, his mom said proudly. Luke leaned forward, eyes gleaming. So when's the wedding? Jackson choked on his soda. What? Ryan grinned. Come on, little brother. You've already done the grand gesture. Next step, ring. Jill laughed, her cheeks pink. Slow down, guys. Jackson nodded vigorously. Yes, slow down. Ryan smirked. Fine. But we're planning the bachelor party. Jackson groaned. Please don't. Later, after surviving the family teasing and escaping to the porch, Jackson and Jill stood side by side, watching snowflakes drift lazily through the crisp air. The world felt quiet, peaceful, except for the chaos in Jackson's chest, which had finally settled into something warm and steady. Jill nudged him lightly. You okay? Jackson smiled. Better than okay. She grinned. That was brave, you know? Jackson chuckled. Terrifying. But worth it. Jill asked softly. Jackson looked at her. The girl who'd been his rival, his friend, his constant, and smiled. Always. Jill's eyes softened. Good. Because I'm not letting you back out now. Jackson laughed, pulling her close. Wouldn't dream of it. They stood there, wrapped in each other and the quiet magic of winter. And for the first time in his life, Jackson Connors didn't feel like he was competing. He felt like he'd won because he had her. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Connors family backyard was buzzing with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue. Jackson strummed his guitar, badly, but proudly, while Jill sat beside him, laughing at every missed chord. Ryan raised a beer. Still sounds like a dying walrus. Jackson grinned. Jealous. Luke smirked. Of what? Your fiancé. Jackson winked at Jill. Exactly. Jill rolled her eyes, but her smile was pure sunshine. You're insufferable. Jackson kissed her cheek. And yet, you keep choosing me. Ryan groaned. Enough with the mushy stuff. Play something we can sing to. Jackson strummed louder, Jill laughed harder, and the whole backyard joined in, off-key, chaotic, perfect. Because that's what life with Jill was, perfect in its imperfection. And Jackson wouldn't trade it for anything.